So we're gonna crank up, man. We're gonna get started because I know I said we're gonna do this, so I'm gonna keep my word and we're gonna get started. We're gonna start with chapter 1: racism, monopolies, and inappropriate behavior. Alice, which road do I take? The Cheshire Cat. Where do you want to go? Alice, I don't know. The Cheshire Cat. Then it doesn't matter which road you take. That's from Lewis Carroll, Alice in Wonderland. Chapter 1: the challenges we face. As the Cheshire Cat said to Alice, who was lost in a Wonderland fantasy, it doesn't matter much which road you take if you don't know where you're going. It is time for Black Americans to take a good hard look at where they have came from and where they are going. Are they moving forward or standing still? After centuries of participating in protests, marches, race riots, and demonstrations, and pushing for integration and passage of an endless number of civil rights laws, Black Americans are increasingly sensing that something is wrong. They question whether or not they are on the right road. A comparative analysis of our socio-economic condition shows that Black Americans have entered the new millennium much the same way they entered the previous for centuries, as an impoverished, powerless, and neglected people. Since there have yet to be any programs and public policies specifically ordered to eliminate the plight of the Black masses, their future, like their past, looks bleak. Amidst a rising tide of white conservatism, the wealth and income gaps between majority white society and blacks are widening. Nearly a half a century after the Supreme Court ordered racial desegregation, Black Americans still bear 6 to 8 times their proportional share of poverty, broken homes, homelessness, criminal incarceration, unemployment, and other socio pathologies. Desegregation should have been about redistribution, wealth, power, and resources, not social integration. Social integration has only addressed the symptoms of our dilemma rather than the causes. As indicated in Figure 1, it is extremely difficult for Black people to progress when the same hands that held the whip still hold almost all of the wealth and power. During centuries of Black enslavement and Jim Crow semi-slavery, the majority society secured and retained its inherited advantages, while a Black minority inherited a legacy of disadvantage in this race-based society. Whites acquired ownership and control of nearly everything of value, as well as a system for keeping blacks non-competitive and powerless. The sheer existence and size of a growing Black underclass is prima facie evidence of institutionalized racism that manipulates symbols, resources, and power to advantage whites over blacks. The reality of America's dilemma is that they are predestined to become a permanent underclass if they do not break free of the numerous disadvantages they have inherited. Blacks should get off the social road to nowhere. There are no yellow brick roads to the future, nor will blacks simply stumble into wealth and power in a competitive society. To find a better road requires black to unlearn old behavior models, strategies, and learn helplessness in race matters. Blacks must understand the nature of the competitive race and make a radical metamorphosis. They must decide where they want to go, get out front of their competitors, and work hard to get there first. If blacks compete, they can expect to succeed and survive in the race for wealth and power. Oh, my light went out. But anyway, race, racism, and wealth. Although slavery and Jim Crow semi-slavery ended generations ago, their legacies live on in various forms of structural racism. Contrary to popular notions about the concept of race, it is more than a biological grouping. Race is about financial, political, and social currencies. It is a form of stored wealth and power. Whiteness has monetary value. Knowing the origin and nature of the value of race is essential to any analysis of Black America's dilemma. It is important that blacks know why the race problem refuses to die and how it is used to keep them in a non-competitive and powerless group. The word race first appeared with the emergence of the slave practice in the 16th century. Records indicate that the word race was selected because the various European slave trading nations were in a contest, competing to profit from the mineral and human wealth of Africa. The prize for winning the race was the power to develop Western civilization, using the wealth extracted out of Africa. Black people were non-competitors in the race. They were the prizes, so they could never play nor win. All the competing slave trade nations, religions, and ethnic groups benefited and were advantaged by black slavery. Slavery is most often approached in social and moral terms. It is seldom discussed in terms of the primary incentive that undergirded the slave trade, wealth building. Slavery must always be explained in monetary terms. Throughout the 16th, 17th, and 18th centuries, organized religion used doctrines to justify slave trading. During this same period, botanists and others in the biological sciences were studying and attempted to stratify plants and animals based upon their biological similarity and differences. They ordered plants and animals by species. Though it took nearly 300 years, the concept of race eventually merged with the concept of biological species. By that time, white Europeans had secured nearly total control of the world's wealth and resource powers. Their new concept of race established superiority on the basis of who controlled the wealth, power, and resources at that particular time in history. Wealth, power, and privileges became the prerogatives of non-blacks. Through intellectual sleight of hand, race became synonymous with the term species in the mid-1800s. At that time, Charles Darwin developed the concept of biological race in his Origin of the Species, and it quickly became popular, often called the survival of the fittest. Darwin's theories, as well as a number of other quasi-scientific concepts, were used by educators, politicians, and religious leaders to justify black slavery and establish a qualitative ranking of inherited genes and human fitness. Naturally, those controlling the wealth and power put their cultural values and biological characteristics at the top of the racial order and blacks at the bottom beneath Caucasians and Mongols, Asians. All the major European religious denominations at the time used the Bible to teach racial ranking with implicit black inferiority. During the black civil rights movement of the 1950s and 1960s, the concept of biological races was intentionally expanded to include cultural, religious, ethnic, and all Spanish-speaking language groups, which were competing with black people for rights, space, and privileges. The concept of race was then diluted to an attitudinal level, and the term racism was used interchangeably with such terms as bias, prejudice, bigotry, and discrimination. Now, the term racism has become so amorphous that it has little meaning and is applied to all so-called minorities. If black Americans are to resolve and reverse the legacies of slavery, they must view and treat racism based upon its original meaning and intent.